Anna, it is such a treat to have you here today. You are a terrific journalist. You're a great bureau chief. You're a great writer. It's a great and complicated, enigmatic, challenging topic. You've done a wonderful job. But best of all, you have such an impressive fan club from the Korea crowd. I see a lot of great friends, Barbara Demick, Suni Terry, I think Ray Burkhardt may be here. So that's really a testament to you and all you've done, so thank you for that.
Thank you. I'm really thrilled to be here.
Good.
Thank you.
I first encountered North Korean diplomats and started my connection with North Korea in 1989 when I served at the U.S. mission to the UN, and I dealt with then Ambassador Ho Jung as the sort of liaison and helped actually with the entry of North Korea and South Korea to UN membership. They had previously only had observer status. And I then went to the U.S. Embassy in South Korea in Seoul, and I was there from 92 to 95, and my area of responsibility was North Korea and U.S. DPRK, North-South relations. And I was frequently called on to talk about North Korea, to explain North Korea to visiting members of Congress, all kinds of groups. And this, of course, was not long after the collapse of the USSR, the Berlin Wall, Ceausescu fall, all that kind of stuff. And the question that I always got, and I'm sure you get, is when is North Korea's turn? When is North Korea going to collapse? I used to say, and it's consistent with much of what you've got in the wonderful book, that North Korea is one half cult, one half medieval kingdom, one half police state. Yeah. And by rights, it shouldn't really even exist because it doesn't have a viable economy, especially in the 21st century. Information really does manage to get in. It's a little bit like that cartoon character that ran off the cliff and their legs are still moving, but gravity hasn't kicked in yet. So when will gravity kick in for North Korea?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is part of the reason I wrote the book, because it's such a puzzle. Like, North Korea should have collapsed decades ago. Like, the Soviet Union fell. When we look at China and Vietnam and Cuba, other communist regimes, they have all transformed in some fundamental way, economic transformation, if not political transformation. So, and North Korea as a state is so anachronistic. And then beyond that, how has Kim Jong-Un been able to take over the leadership, for them to do what no other communist country has done, and to pass down the succession not once now but twice? So when I set out on this, I wanted to try to explore how Kim Jong-un had actually done it. But one thing I have learned, and I imagine you have also learned along the way, is that it's very dangerous to predict anything about North Korea. North Korea has a habit of defying all expectations. So I would say, right now we see no signs whatsoever of any cracks in the regime. There is no sign that Kim Jong-un is anything but completely in control at the top there. So I don't know when it will no longer cease to exist, but I don't think it's going to be anytime soon.
Well, you talk in the book about some of the levers that he uses, the police state, the informers, the dongju, the prospering elites, the indoctrination, and so on. So you make a good case for what it is that he can use and does use, in fact, to sustain the regime and to help explain the success he had in actually making the transition to leader and staying in power, which defied, I think, a lot of expectations. But there are also countervailing forces that you document in the book as well. The very creation of wealth through markets and other means creates competing power centers. There are a lot of sort of constituencies within North Korea. Dictators have politics too, as you explained.
Yeah.
So what are the vulnerabilities that he faces? What is it that's going to be crucial for Kim Jong-un in order to remain in power, in order to kind of see his project through the way that his grandfather did?
Yeah, well, he's proven to be very successful so far in keeping the police state fully intact. Like, the surveillance has only gotten stronger under him, and especially now that, cell phones are widespread in North Korea, they have adjusted to that. There is technology, software in the cell phones, so everything can be monitored at all times. North Korea is no longer a hermit kingdom. There is a lot of information coming in over the border. I've interviewed many, scores, perhaps hundreds of people who've escaped from North Korea. I've never met anybody who hasn't seen outside media, whether it be, South Korean soppy dramas or Chinese action films or something. They've seen what the outside world looks like. So through this very brutal system of repression where people deemed to be guilty of political crimes like questioning the regime can be sent off to re-education camps, he has been able to keep a lid on the information side, the political side there. But it's on the economic side that all of the change in the last few years has happened in North Korea. And there has been so much change, like more than at any other time in the 70-plus year history of North Korea, I think. And that Kim Jong-un has allowed the markets which began during the famine, the markets which are well documented and nothing to envy, to take hold, so that now there are more than 450 of these marketplaces around the country. They are how most people earn their living. Have loosened the regime's grip on the people. But I think it's there that could potentially run into trouble, because people, just by doing nothing, by stop repressing the markets or entrepreneurialism, he's allowed people to earn their way from a very low base to a slightly higher standard of living. And many people around the country now have more agency and more ability to fend for themselves. But they also have rising expectations in a way like never before. They've experienced this increase in their living standard, slightly, and they want that to continue, as all people do. And so I've been really struck by, there's this one family in particular that I met in Thailand on the border, and they had escaped from North Korea 1 week before. That was a man who was a fisherman, so he was out in the sea and was able to do lots of smuggling and things on the side of his state-run fishing job, and his wife and their 2 children, and they were very comfortable in North Korea. He told me, they could afford to buy meat and they wanted for nothing. But they decided to defect because they were unhappy with their children's schooling. The same reason that many Korean families move to America, right? They want to give their children better educational opportunities. And they were from this rural area, and the teachers didn't care much. There was no art class in the school, and the oldest son was very artistically inclined. So they escaped to South Korea. And when I went and caught up with them in South Korea, they were kind of grumbling about their apartment and things, because it was, a little more difficult for them in South Korea. And I wonder if this kind of disillusionment, this is one family that I encountered, but I think that is becoming a growing risk. If Kim Jong-un cannot sustain this kind of momentum, then he could encounter more disillusionment, among the elites and perhaps amongst the masses too.
Mm-hmm. So I think you, in the book, allude to the recognition that often revolutions and insurrections start not at the moment of greatest repression, but sometimes when reform has begun to take place. You also talk about the spike in corruption, and I wonder if that tends to eat away at the ability of the regime to actually enforce the discipline and the rules that are so important to keeping the Kim dynasty going.
To some extent, yes. Corruption is rife when it comes to economic crimes like selling something illegal or making too much money or whatever. Then those kind of problems can be solved with bribes generally. The political crimes are more difficult to deal with. If you're just caught with South Korean pop songs on your phone, you can bribe your way out of that with a crate of beer for the police guard or whatever. But more severe things, serious things are more difficult. So yes, it's a challenge, but I think that, the police state is still very strong and that the network still exists. So at the moment, it's not too serious for Kim Jong-Un.
Well, while we're on the subject of Kim Jong-un's vulnerabilities, you talked in the book and told some great stories about little Fatty the Third huffing and puffing when he planted a tree with Moon Jae-in, about there's the kind of weird limping incident a few years ago. His, whether his body mass index has reached triple digits yet, I don't know. But he smokes. You talked about his knocking back some soju, or if not Johnny Walker Blue, with Dennis Rodman and so on. This does not sound like a pretty healthy lifestyle, and in fact even mention that that's perhaps the greatest threat to regime stability.
And since I wrote that, we've seen Kim Jong-un with Vladimir Putin in Vladivostok, struggling for breath, kind of really heaving away. Like clearly, I know he lends himself to caricature because of these weird physical traits, his haircut and stuff, but it is quite a serious point. He is not a healthy man. He's 35 years old. He's clearly overweight. His wife joked with South Korean officials that she couldn't convince him to quit smoking. So if I was worried about his longevity, if he's worried about his longevity, he should be cutting down on the steaks or whatever he's doing. But the serious point here, I think, is is there no doctor in North Korea that can tell him this? We know that people are not able to speak truth to him. It seems like whether it's his negotiators at the Hanoi summit properly briefing him on what might happen next. Maybe, on the health side, is that also an issue?
Hey, the White House has a doctor who told the president he was going to live to be 200, so just saying.
Set that one up.
Well, but health is one piece of it, but in all your research, what did you learn about, lifestyles of the rich and famous? What's life like for Kim Jong-un?
Life is great for Kim Jong-un. He has 33, at last count, residential compounds spread out around North Korea. He, has this palatial complex in Wonsan on the east coast, kind of Martha's Vineyard of North Korea, where he takes his, the elites to. He's even, when he's been there, his military people, he didn't even have to leave his palatial compound to watch some of the missile launches. His military people rolled the missiles up to an island opposite and fired them off for his viewing pleasure, So we know, while sanctions are generally hitting the population, I think, that he does not seem to be wanting for anything. So we've seen him pulling up in Singapore and Hanoi and in Pyongyang in brand new Mercedes, Maybach, Pullman limousines and Rolls Royce and things, signing with $1,000 Mont Blanc pens. He's doing fine.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the mobile missiles that rolled up along his condo in Wonsan-a-Lago or whatever it's called. And we really ought to turn to the not-so-funny parts of it. You have an absolutely fabulous line in the book to the general effect of, nothing says take me seriously like an H-bomb and an ICBM missile. And you're absolutely right. So I think that certainly the U.S. government and the national security establishments in most countries take this threat very, very seriously. But talk us through what the nuclear program really does for Kim Jong-un. It's not like he can actually use it. You yourself have pointed out that that's sort of instant destruction of the Kim dynasty. North Korea is not short of deterrence or leverage. They've got chemical weapons, biological weapons. They've got rockets and artillery on the Kaesong Heights. What has been driving Kim Jong-Un to defy the world and to not only achieve this level of nuclear capability, but to keep going?
Yeah, I think, when Kim Jong-un came into power, he revived this policy that his grandfather had started, the Byungjin policy of simultaneous development of the nuclear program and the economy at the same time. And there was a lot of kind of skepticism that he could do this, that he could have guns and butter. And he didn't do it simultaneously. He did it consecutively, was doing it consecutively. But he turned at the beginning very much to the nuclear program. That was his focus from the outset. And made really astonishing progress. There was a lot of derision at his suggestions that he was working, his people were working on the final stages of an ICBM, or when he said that that he wanted a hydrogen bomb. And then when they said they had tested a hydrogen bomb and it demonstrably wasn't, laughter ensued. But he put a lot of effort, a lot of resources into this and eventually did do it. And I think it serves a number of purposes for him. Like, first of all, he was 27 years old when he came in. He's technically a marshal in the North Korean military, or of the North Korean military. He had not served a single day in the army or in any kind of military service. So he had no qualifications or credentials for that, which would no doubt have made the real generals quite skeptical of his leadership. So I think developing this nuclear program may have placated some of the military hardliners who may have had misgivings about him. They got the ultimate weapon obviously there had been several nuclear tests under Kim Jong-il, but they were really small and they were not making much progress. So that made a lot of progress under Kim Jong-un. I think as well there is the external factor, which yes, he cannot use it. That would be suicidal for him to actually shoot a nuclear-tipped missile anywhere. But he has proven that he has this very credible deterrent, and if an American president was threatening or thinking about raining down fire and fury, he may think twice if there was an option of a retaliatory nuclear strike on Guam even. But then one thing that I think is often overlooked about North Korea is that the nuclear program has quite a lot of domestic purpose for him. And one story that I heard that really stuck with me was that I interviewed a young guy who had been a science student at university in North Korea. And this guy, he defected because he couldn't bear the thought of a third Kim running the place. He was no fan of this regime whatsoever and was one of the sharpest critics of it that I spoke to. But he said, he remembered in physics class learning about North Korea's nuclear program and feeling this immense sense of pride, of national pride, that North Korea had been able, North Korea, which is so backwards in so many other areas, had been able to develop this nuclear program, and especially since South Korea and Japan had not. So I think that this has stoked some nationalism inside North Korea. And of course that's rammed down their throats nonstop too. Mm-hmm. But some of it is genuine, I think.
Well, that's an important point. Now, it's true that the North Korean Army, the Korean People's Army, has withered in terms of its actual military capabilities. Yeah. There's often not enough aviation fuel or other material and equipment to really conduct the kind of training and exercises that they need. So at some level, the nuclear weapons and the missiles serve as something of a substitute. Yeah. I wonder if it also might not free up the Korean People's Army to engage in their main occupations, which is constructing these great villas and plowing the fields in an effort to raise crops to feed the people. Did you, in your research, get any windows into the Army, into the military? A huge fraction of the population serves for years, 8 years in the military.
Yeah, I did, and it's really obvious. Like on my visits to Pyongyang, now there are these big apartment towers, high-rises that look quite impressive from a distance. When you get up close, they're falling to pieces. But all you can see, the labourers there, it's all military labour. They're wearing their olive green uniforms and things. So they are very active in the construction sector and all sorts of fundraising for the regime, I think. But beyond that, I think they, as you say, it's a very boring job to be in the North Korean army because you cannot exercise or anything. You know, people I have talked to who have escaped from that said that they spend their military service building roads and sweeping paths and things like that. So not that strong army.
So if there is an important domestic purpose, a galvanizing sense of national pride and achievement in the nuclear program, and there is a geopolitical and diplomatic rationale as well as a deterrent and security rationale to it, all of which makes sense. You mentioned Sig Hecker, who's a very respected nuclear scientist at Stanford and someone I know and admire, who, at least at the time that you interviewed him, said he judged that North Korea was producing a new nuclear bomb roughly at the rate of 6 or 7 a year. I think the Defense Intelligence Agency in Washington is even more forward-leaning and has estimated something more on the order of 10 to 12 in the course of a year. Why does Kim, do you imagine, continue to produce this arsenal? What additional value does he get in just bulking up the sheer number of nuclear weapons? You'd think for purposes of pride and purposes of deterrent, you know, one on the launch pad, one in the glove compartment, and maybe one in the storage unit would do the trick.
Yeah. Well, look, you've just highlighted the fact that we really have no idea. That's a really wide range of estimates of their nuclear arsenal, right? So Kim Jong-Un could now say, yes, you're right, we've been making 6 or 7 a year, and perhaps give up 12 or what have you as part of a diplomatic process with Donald Trump, and still have a lot of capability still there. So I think he can take advantage of the fact that the outside world knows so little about it.
Okay. Well, you told us that Kim Jong-un is, among other things, described as the genius of geniuses, right?
Yep.
So let's talk about geniuses.
Okay.
Because we have one too, right? We have a stable genius. So we know, I think we know what it is that our stable genius wants. He wants an end to the threat of nuclear weapons and missiles from North Korea. He wants Trump condo and golf resort in Wonsan. He wants a Nobel Prize. What is it that their genius wants? What is it that Kim Jong-un is really after?
At a basic level, he wants to stay in power. That's the number one priority. When he gets out of bed every morning, he wants to keep his job. So everything he does, from the nuclear program, from maybe nascent economic development, the repression, it is all designed to keep him in power there. But in terms of the process that is going on in fits and starts at the moment, partly he wants to normalize himself. He wants to come across as an internationally respected, legitimate leader of a nuclear-armed state. He wants to be seen as the equal of President Trump, President Xi, Vladimir Putin, all of it. He wants to be respected and revered, I think, abroad and at home, because that will, this is a propaganda gift to him, being given this red carpet treatment around the place. So all of that is designed around that, I think. But in terms of why he is embarking on this diplomatic process now, he desperately needs relief from sanctions. And that isn't, he cannot have the kind of economic development he wants while the sanctions are in place. Because although for many years the sanctions have not been effective, I think things changed in 2017 when Donald Trump started threatening fire and fury. And, the Chinese, much in the North Koreans and Japanese and South Koreans, people didn't know how to interpret Donald Trump. They didn't know how seriously to take him. They didn't know what these tweets meant. All of them are trying to figure it out. But I think the Chinese became concerned. You know, the Chinese number one priority is stability on the Korean Peninsula. And the only thing they dislike more than instability, I think, is a military strike on North Korea. So they really had to enforce these sanctions against North Korea like never before. And to my surprise, I've just been on a reporting trip to Dandong. To my surprise, the sanctions are still surprisingly tight. They are still being enforced to a surprisingly high level there. So I think this pain is still being inflicted on North Korea. And that is why Kim Jong-Un is so desperate to get the talk started again. The recent rocket launches, I think, were a sign of his frustration and an effort to get Donald Trump's attention back on him. I mean, that didn't really work. Donald Trump wasn't so worried about. What really worked was the beautiful love letter that Kim Jong-un sent him yesterday. But either way, you know, he's still, despite the disaster of Hanoi, he has shown that he still wants this diplomatic process to continue. And Donald Trump has shown he is still invested in that too, you know, much to John Bolton's chagrin, right? He hasn't realised that the North Koreans are never going to give up their nuclear program and reverted to Plan A. So I think that he will continue to press for this, partly because Kim Jong-un knows that he has this very unique window of opportunity right now, in that he has a South Korean president who has been very willing to be the mediator and to not take any credit for any of it as well, that he's been in there bringing these two sides together. And that South Korean president, Moon Jae-in, will be out of office in 2022 because of term limits in South Korea. But also he has this very unconventional American president in office, who knows for how long, but, you know, a limited term as well. And that this may represent a unique opportunity for him to strike some kind of deal. A peace treaty, you know, who knows what kind of deal they could come up with, but he knows he may not get this opportunity, this perfect storm again. And also Xi Jinping, you know, Xi Jinping is not going anywhere anytime soon, but he has, you know, injected himself into this process. He's not wanted to be left out of it. So Kim Jong-un needs to take advantage of this.
Understood. Well, as you point out, the meeting in Singapore, and even for that matter, the meeting in Hanoi, unmistakably gave Kim Jong-un tremendous face internationally. He was received as a state guest in Singapore and in Vietnam. He's had, 4 meetings with Xi Jinping. He's now met with Vladimir Putin, the Japanese prime minister, is willing to meet with him unconditionally, etc. So his status has been utterly transformed from the isolated pariah who was in some jeopardy of being, you know, called up to the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. On the sanctions side, your point is well taken. I'm not sure when your trip was. I visited the Dandong border area back in the fall of 2017 and saw precisely what you're describing, which is that in against the backdrop of fire and fury, motivated by the horror the Chinese have at the prospect that there could be chaos or war on their border, and also because they were good and mad at Little Fatty.
Yeah.
The Chinese authorities were unmistakably turning the screws on the local businesses and local officials, who themselves were pretty mad at Kim Jong-un for having executed Jang Song-taek, the uncle who was their business partner. And so many of the local development projects sort of hinged on North Korea doing their part, i.e. completing the Friendship Bridge and so on. But since then, the reality is that a lot of loosening has taken place in the enforcement of sanctions. And look no further than the little picture book that Acting Secretary of Defense Shanahan gave to the Chinese defense minister at Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore, showing hundreds of pictures of illegal ship-to-ship transfer of oil and so on. And So there's a lot of seepage. There's also, as you very correctly point out, and in your book, and something I talked about in a report that we did here at the Asia Society, a huge and under-recognized cyber component to North Korea's criminal activities, stealing tens or hundreds of millions of dollars through cyber means. So there is some relief. It's not full-on sanctions. And Kim Jong-un has gotten not only an agreement in principle to peace declaration or even a peace treaty from President Trump, but actually gotten a suspension of U.S. ROK exercises, which is phenomenal, which is really huge. So what is it in this process that is going to make Kim conclude, okay, not that things are going my way and I want to, lock it in while Trump is in office, but rather that I actually need to begin rolling back and ultimately relinquishing my nuclear program?
Yeah, I mean, it was 3 weeks ago that I went to Dandong or so, and I went there expecting to find it as back to business as usual, that like sanctions, what sanctions, as had been the case previously. Yes, there is seepage, for sure, but I was really surprised. Like, I went around these big industrial complexes where North Korean workers had been sewing garments and things like that, and the guide told me it was packed until a year ago or something, and now it was very diminished. So I think there's enough activity going on to let the steam out of North Korea, but not so much that they are flourishing. So that is where he needs additional help. He can't just let the steam out. He needs positive momentum. But, I don't think Kim Jong-un is ever going to conclude that. Kim Jong-un's not going to give up his nuclear weapons. Like in 2011, when he was taking over the regime and was his father's apprentice there, the Arab Spring was happening. Muammar Gaddafi, who had struck a deal with the United States to relinquish his nuclear capability, was pulled out of a ditch and killed. This will be seared on Kim Jong-un's brain. So I think I cannot see a situation where he would be willing to give up his nuclear capability. And I think that's part of what this act he's been putting on this last year has been about. He's wanting to portray himself as reasonable and rational, and you can trust me, I won't use them. He's just going to put them under lock and key and keep them there. But I think, he is paranoid. Dictators by nature are paranoid, right? And so he is not going to feel that he is able to give these up. I think he's going to try and pretend that he's willing to, and that he may give up something. He may give up some warheads. He may give up some missile parts. But I can't see him giving up the capability to make more or to use them, because he needs them for his longevity.
Makes sense. So President Trump has been a great publicist for the great Successor. He responded to the report of your scoop on Kim's stepbrother, Kim Jong-nam's assassination, and your report that Kim Jong-nam may well have been an asset of the U.S. intelligence and perhaps other intelligence services. Now, he responded by assuring his buddy Kim Jong-un that sort of thing would never happen on his watch, but nevertheless, publicity is publicity. But as you mentioned, he revealed that he had received a very, very warm, lovely letter from his pen pal, from his buddy Jong-un. Nobody, I think, outside of maybe the CIA psychiatrists and so on, has gotten so far into Kim Jong-un's head as Anna Fifield has.
It is a scary place in there.
So help me out here. Walk us through what you think, what you intuit was in that letter. So, dear Donald, it's been one long, lonely year since our meeting in Singapore. So our first date. Sorry about that misfire in Hanoi. What else does the letter say?
No, the letter says, "Dear Donald, Your Excellency Donald, like no American president before has ever shown the vision and the courage that you have. You know, huge. You know, we joke, but Kim Jong-Un has shown he really knows how to push or tick all of the boxes that will say what Donald Trump wants to hear. And I have it on good authority that the North Korean, his advisors, senior people in the regime, they have read The Art of the Deal. They have read Fire and Fury by Michael Wolff inside the Trump White House. They, as these North Koreans that show up to Track 2 talks with American officials, show an encyclopedic knowledge of President Trump's tweets. So they are passing every word and memorizing every word. Like, they have way more information about Donald Trump than the Americans have about Kim Jong-Un, which makes it all the more incredible that if the CIA had recruited Kim Jong-nam, that's a major boon for our American intelligence services, so it's not something to be given up lightly. Astounding. But I think, Kim Jong-un here is trying to say everything that he knows Donald Trump wants to hear in terms of, we made such a good start. Yeah, maybe we had an unfortunate time in Hanoi, but we need to continue this process for the future of the world and the relations between our two countries. And, when we look at that 4-point agreement that was signed in Singapore, there was nothing in it, right? And yet Donald Trump was declaring the threat from North Korea's nukes over. So he knows he can just be all style and no substance and string this along. So I imagine that's more of the same.
So maybe P.S. My nomination letter to the Nobel Peace Prize Committee was longer than the Japanese Prime Minister's?
Yeah, that's right. Maybe.
So, and when is Jong-un going to get his Twitter handle?
There are a number of parody accounts out there, but I cannot confirm on that. Yeah.
But also, help us think a little bit about this bromance, about this relationship. The theory of the case from Kim's point of view is, as you've described, tick the boxes, press the buttons, take advantage of the fact that there is a president who has supreme confidence in his own instincts, his own intuition, who is prepared to maybe do to his senior advisors, John Bolton, what Kim Jong-un is said to have done to his advisor, Kim Yong-chol, send him out for a little re-education in the countryside. But what is the value of the kind of bromance that the president has sought to establish with Kim? Kim is a Leninist leader. Kim is a dictator. Can that sort of personal touch, personal outreach, the flattery, the blandishments, I wouldn't let the CIA conduct operations against you, is that a viable strategy? Does that take us somewhere?
I mean, both of these leaderships, I don't want to say they're the same. They're not the same. But both leaders are very top-down, right? Like, North Korea is a one-man regime, pretty much, was one-man supported. And Donald Trump has also shown a tendency to ignore the advice of the advisors, the experts around him. So, I'm sure we'll disagree on this, but, before the Singapore summit, and even a little to this day, I felt quite optimistic about this process. Not optimistic that Kim Jong-un would give up his weapons, but I thought if these two unconventional leaders of their respective countries could strike some kind of deal, a top-down deal, maybe they could make some of the progress that's been so elusive over the past 30 years of trying. So I think it's not over. They are still both clearly showing that they want this diplomatic process to continue. But how they get back to it, like after the failure of Hanoi, President Trump, I doubt that he's going to travel all the way to Asia to see Kim Jong-un again. It was also very risky for Kim Jong-un because unlike Singapore, he actually announced in advance to the North Korean people through the media that he was going to Hanoi to meet Trump again, which is something he doesn't usually do, and which then, left him on the hook to explain what had happened, and may explain why he was so angry with his advisors afterwards as well. I think that they will try to keep some momentum in this process, and because it is really important from a domestic standpoint for Kim Jong-un, this does give him face at home and make him look like he is achieving something, and really importantly, something that his father and his grandfather never managed to achieve, which is that face-to-face meeting with the leader of the free world.
Yeah, that's for sure. So let's play this out a little bit. What is the path to a third summit? How would you see that unfolding? What would you expect?
Yeah, see, this is the part where I get to say I'm really glad I'm a journalist, and my job is just to write about this, not a diplomat who has to figure out a solution. Because I do think it's really hard. I don't know how they get over the hurdles that have been set up towards them now, but there is the will. So I'll leave it to the diplomats to sort that out and avoid answering your question.
All right, I'll let you off the hook on that one, but ask you, as an observer, as a journalist, as an analyst, and as somebody who, all joking aside, really has looked hard at the factors that have gone into making Kim Jong-un who he is. Put yourself in his shoes and tell us a little bit, particularly since you know the region so well. You're bureau chief in Beijing, you've served in Tokyo, you've served in Seoul. What does the world look like from the perspective of North Korea, from the perspective of Kim Jong-un? He looks around at Russia, China, Japan, South Korea, the United States, Southeast Asia. What does he see? What does he want? What does he fear?
I think that the kind of developmental dictatorship model of Asia, certain Asian countries, holds a lot of appeal to him. I think Singapore was an incredibly smart location for that first summit, because it's a small state that has grown rich, made something out of having very little, apart from the sea aspect of it. So I think that he would very much like that, some kind of economic development. Pyongyang's not going to turn into Singapore anytime soon, right? But I think the idea that you can have a lot of economic development, Singapore is a democracy, but one family has pretty much been in charge, or one party at least has been in charge for almost the entire time of Singapore's existence. So that does hold some appeal to him. But I think in general, when he looks at the democracies around him, and even when he looks at China, he sees the dangers of opening up. A lot of people, when he came into power, a lot of people thought that spending his adolescent years in Singapore would turn him into a reformer, open his eyes.
In Switzerland.
And what did I say?
Singapore.
Oh, Singapore. In Switzerland. His adolescent years in Switzerland would turn him into an economic reformer, would show him the benefits of a liberal democracy and things. But in fact, I think it was the exact opposite, in that he saw that if he was just another normal person, if he wasn't the genius of geniuses, the brilliant comrade, if he wasn't this princeling of North Korea, he would have just been a nobody. And he didn't have a particularly good time in Switzerland, even though he got to play basketball nonstop. But he struggled at school. He had communication problems. He wasn't very good at his academic work. So I think he probably realized that if North Korea was to open or change at all, he would be at risk of losing his privileged status and, this decadence and, the awe that he enjoys inside North Korea. And even when you look at China, China has gone through tremendous economic transformation, but really no political change. But there is still a jockeying for power in China at the upper echelons of the Communist Party, right? So there is still a race there. There is factions, and people disappear from the top leadership. So I think he would see even Chinese-style economic, reform and opening would be intolerable for him.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to open the floor to questions in a few minutes. I know I'm being greedy, but I can't resist. Let me ask just two more questions.
Okay.
One is this. You just talked about his adolescence in Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
I know in the book you mentioned his grandmother drove that decision for Kim Jong-un and later for the two younger Kims, but I confess to being mystified. What was it that possessed Kim Jong-il to send his children to be educated in the West, let alone in Switzerland? That doesn't sound very Juche to me.
You're suggesting that Juche has some fundamental basis. It does not. This is the theory of self-reliance in North Korea. So I can tell you the answer to that. It all began because Kim Jong-nam, the oldest child, born in 1971, I think, he was like a caged bird in North Korea. He was the first of Kim Jong-il's children. Mm-hmm. He lived on this very isolated compound. He had no siblings. So his aunt came into the compound and looked after him and brought her two children too. One is 5 years older than Kim Jong-nam, one's 10 years older. And they were going crazy in there. They had no friends, they couldn't play with people, they didn't go to school, they had tutors. And they decided that these children should be able to live some kind of normal semblance of life. So they went off to Moscow. And this was during the Soviet Union. And it was, Kim Jong-nam did not do well there. Like, there were the deprivations, it was very cold. Kim Jong-un complained about the cleanliness of the bathrooms at the school. He just hated it. And so they ended up going home to Pyongyang. And then it was one evening that Ri Soo-young, who you may know, who was the foreign minister of North Korea, and is now very senior in charge of foreign relations there, suggested that Switzerland might be a better alternative for them because Switzerland is, famously discreet when it comes to dictators and money and things like this. So Ri Soo-young and Uncle Jang Song-taek went off to Geneva and checked out this international school which Michael Douglas went to, and several Gandhis and a Thai princess and things, and had this background of hosting high-profile people. And they decided to send Kim Jong-nam and his older cousin/sister, posing as a sister, Ri Nam-ok, there to Geneva. So off they went, and that worked out. They lived in some lavish villa, went to school. They went into the French stream so as to avoid all the South Koreans who were in the English stream. And this set the precedent for it. And now when it came time for Kim Jong-un and his siblings to study abroad, Switzerland obviously still had all the same attractions, but Kim Jong-il kept all of his families very separate. So Kim Jong-nam and Kim Jong-un never knew each other as children. And so Kim Jong-un and his siblings, they went to Bern, the capital of Switzerland, not to Geneva. So they remained separate throughout. And it was there that they also enrolled in an English language school and then moved into a German language public school.
One last question before I open the floor. You interviewed dozens, if not hundreds, of defectors from North Korea, people who had been, in many cases, really tormented and brutalized by that system. Did you pick up any clues about how the world could and should deal with the atrocious human rights situation in North Korea? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great question. So many people have said to me, have talked about the kind of epiphanies they had, the realizations that they've had by having glimpses of the outside world, whether it's people who've been traveling or people like, very senior people like Tae Yong-ho, who was the North Korean deputy ambassador in London who defected with his family, or ordinary people who've just seen South Korean dramas. And the things that they describe about it, like, they're just so fascinated to see wow, this ordinary person owns a car, or to see the way kind of respectful language, the way women are treated. I mean, South Korea is often not great at that, but it's better than North Korea. But just to see like interpersonal relations in South Korean dramas and things, and it's these kinds of realizations that at some stage have proven to be like the tipping point for many people, that they cannot stand this North Korean repression and isolation any longer and decide to try to escape. Even if sometimes they do suffer, the rich people suffer a decrease in their standard of living, it becomes worth it. So I think that this regime in North Korea has survived for so long by trying to isolate the people from the outside world, by trying to be the hermit kingdom. So I think that maybe the more, we shouldn't be helping them to try to do that. The more information that can be gotten into North Korea and the more North Koreans who can be brought out, why are there, North Koreans playing soccer in, Japan or, friendly countries in Asia, Cambodia, whatever, like orchestras traveling and things, people-to-people engagement, as well as just, some of this non-political stuff. I think that could maybe help open North Korean people's eyes more or make them feel empowered to do something about the system themselves. I mean, of course, that's the exact reason why the North Korean regime tries to limit this. But I think we in the outside world should not be helping them to isolate their people.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Anna. Okay, I'm going to open the floor.
Thank you.
We have microphones. And I would ask respectfully that you stand, wait for the microphone, identify yourself, ask a question, one question, and keep it brief. Thank you. So, with that, I see a gentleman toward the back of the room. In the white shirt. Yes, you. With glasses.
Hello, thank you so much. I'm a student in the at the Yale Law School, and I guess I just had one question. So I guess when outsiders look at North Korea and recent denuclearization efforts, I guess there tend to be two competing interpretations. Either, as you say, that Kim Jong-un never intended to give up nuclear weapons, that he's taking advantage of a naive U.S. president in some ways, and this is based on analysis of previous North Korean behavior, or that Kim Jong-un, that something is.
It's good. I can hear.
That something is intrinsically different about Kim Jong-un, or that that something has changed in his calculus, and that he's taking liberalization in a way that his predecessors haven't. I guess the U.S. Specifically would support the former view. And I think Koreans are beginning to disagree with that. What material evidence on Kim Jong-un specifically have you found to suggest that Kim Jong-un never intended to give up nuclear weapons?
Yeah, well, I mean, he had the opportunity, right? He had a deal offered to him in Hanoi, which he declined to take. The evidence is in his actions, I think. If he really wanted to have a deal, he could drop all his conditions now and say that he'll meet under any circumstances. But and he's not doing that. So I think we can deduce a lot from that. Yeah.
Deductions are allowed.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, no? Agnes?
Hi, I'm Agnes Shu Tang of Asia Society. I have a rather superficial question. Tell us more about the title of your book, particularly the divine part.
Okay.
And also the reference to the brilliant comrade. I'm curious.
Yeah. Okay, The Great Successor I came up with. It was my working title all along because when the North Korean state media announced Kim Jong-il's death, the newsreader said, "You have no need to fear because the great successor is in place." to lead us onwards towards the revolution. So that's their title. And then the subtitle, all credit must go to my brilliant editor, Clive Priddle, who is here, most of these are North Korean words. North Korea calls him brilliant comrade. So it is kind of facetious, like mocking, using their own words or their own kinds of words to show just how kind of ridiculous, I guess, this whole myth of the family is. But I went back and forth on this because I don't want him to be seen as a joke. Like, the thesis of the book is that he is not a joke. He is a real threat to the outside world and to his own people every day. But I also wanted to kind of tap into this sense of ridiculous about him and the myth that they force down people's throats. Yeah.
I can't resist jumping in and telling you that when I was at the NSC, on my computer I would get a feed from a service in the U.S. government, the Open Source Center, that translates the media of critical countries, including North Korea. And so I would be able to scroll through and read everything that was being printed by the North Korea media, KCNA, Nodong Shinmun, and the hyperbole and the thesaurus that North Korea uses in its sort of political invective is unbelievable. And I used to take these incredibly hyperbolic statements from KCNA sometimes and change some of the names and send them to my colleagues just for fun. It's pretty exciting stuff. Let us see. Yes, there's a lady in the back row.
Hi, thank you for being here, Anna, and congratulations on your feat.
Thank you. Yeah.
I have a question about sources. So in your book, you talk about your approach to interviewing North Korean escapees, which I really appreciated. I'm curious about how you handled South Korean sources, pundits or journalists whose works are often notoriously colored by their political persuasions.
Yeah.
Most recently, there was an erroneous report about the purge of Kim Jong-chol. So I'm curious, in general, how you discern the veracity of your sources, especially when they deal with such an impenetrable regime as North Korea.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, South Korean intelligence reports in particular, I take with a huge, with a mountain of salt, really, because they are wrong as often as they are right, and they have killed off many North Korean officials only to have them show up, fine and dandy, like Hyun Sung-wol, a few months or years later. So sometimes they are, but I try to be very careful and to avoid rushing to reporting things. Often these situations become clear by themselves. If somebody's removed from all of the state media, you can glean that they have, that they're true and things. But it's something that I have thought about a lot because it is so political and politicized in South Korea, and even the intelligence, or especially the intelligence, maybe changes with the governments and how it goes. So there are, however, a number of analysts in South Korea who have been watching the leadership for many years and have proven to be right. And so there's one in particular at Sejong Institute called Chong Song-tang, who I talked to a lot, and he had predicted Kim Jong-Un would take over and had been right about a lot of these things. So I tend to go back to those people who have a proven track record. Yeah.
You also do a wonderful job in the book of debunking some of the over-the-top stories about the assassination or the execution of Jang Song-taek and savage dogs and a lot of these other disinformation media.
Yeah, because I think people expect, North Korea is a horrific place. People expect horrific stories. So when the story is not adequately, bizarre, there's a tendency to exaggerate them and to believe the exaggerations, to want more and more lurid tales out of North Korea. And so that's something I find pretty regrettable.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, sir.
My name is Joel Rogers. I've been impressed for what seems to be remarkable continuity in North Korean policy from Kim Jong-il to Kim Jong-un, and former times, Kim Jong-Un was not very big. And I'm wondering, have we identified in a power structure there a North Korean George Kennan or group of people who are somehow guiding this? Because they've actually played a weak hand rather well, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, they have. You're right. They've played a weak hand incredibly well. And there is a lot of consistency there in the regime. They've figured out what works in some respects. But we don't know if there's a North Korean George Kennan. You know, we've seen he has a number of advisors. Some have changed. You know, he's gotten rid of many of them once they've served their purpose. But, you know, some have also stayed the same. So I think, this is one of the many opaque things about North Korea that I can't answer for you. I'm sorry that, we don't know a lot about the internal dynamics and who is advising him here. Sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm interested in the relationship.
Sorry, and you are?
I'm Jean Entwistle, member of the group. I'm interested in the relationship between China and North Korea, particularly the financial arrangement. I know in the past that the Koreans have been sending workers into China and making money, having them work there and so forth. Is that still continuing, and is there still financial support for Korea from China?
Yes, so actually when I just went to Dandong, I saw these workers there. So under sanctions, the workers have to leave China or Russia or wherever they are by the end of this year. So the deadline hasn't come yet for them all to return. But there are still a lot of workers in the outside world, mostly in Russia. Like men go to Russia and do logging, and women go to China and work in garment factories and things like that generally. But there's also a lot of North Korean workers building statues in Africa, and they've been building the football stadium. Well, you know, they're probably not there anymore because we know about it. But this has become a huge source of income for the North Korean regime, more than $1 billion a year. But it's also, you know, really surprisingly, this is a really sought-after job amongst North Koreans. North Koreans bribe their way to get these jobs where they're sent abroad to be locked into a dormitory and work 6-hour days at a sewing machine because it's so much more lucrative. You know, they can go home with a few $1,000s at the end of their time. And, you know, that's transformational in North Korea. They can start a business or, you know, change their family's lot in life with that kind of money. So the bigger question of the relationship between North Korea and China, China does not want North Korea to collapse. So it is always doing enough to make sure that North Korea stays intact, even though it may have turned off the taps a little bit recently. But one of the huge puzzles, and I do not have an answer to this, is that North Korea is running like a $2 billion trade deficit with China. And we don't know how they're doing this. Like much, you know, smarter economists have been looking at this, and we can't figure out what's going on. We know Chinese statistics are not reliable. But China is clearly providing a lot of support to North Korea that North Korea is not having to pay back at the moment. So that hasn't changed really. But China doesn't seem to be doing very much to accelerate that and to help North Korea grow too much at the moment.
Sure. One thing I would add, Anna, is, and something that you point at in the book, is on cyber, the extent to which North Korean hackers have dispersed and embedded themselves throughout China, including something I saw in the border region, which is in the gray zone where there are the North Koreans who have a lot of cyber expertise from Kim Il-sung University and elsewhere are involved in creating apps and betting sites, sports betting, and so on. And so there's both money to be made in China in the gray market, but then there's also this wholesale cyber theft, much of which takes place using or hijacking Chinese servers, since, of course, North Korea is not connected to the World Wide Web.
Yeah.
This question also connects to a question that we've gotten online for you, which is, what would you say by way of describing North Korean attitudes towards China?
North Korea hates China. They can't stand, they hate the fact that they're so, the regime hates the fact that it's so dependent on China. And Kim Jong-Un has really tried to lessen that dependence on China. I think it was 2015 was the year of North Korean-Russian friendship, and they've promoted a lot of that efforts because, they don't want to be beholden to China. I think they look down their noses quite a lot at China. They consider themselves to be very there. And so we saw for the first 6 years, Kim Jong-un totally ignored Xi Jinping that whole time. Not just ignored him, but actively sought to embarrass him when we think about the first Belt and Road Forum or the G20 meeting in Hangzhou, where he launched missiles during that period, rained on Xi Jinping's parade, but really suffered nothing for it, or very little for it, because of this balance, because he knows that Xi Jinping does not want to risk the collapse of the North Korean regime and is therefore limited in how he can respond. But I think definitely there is no love lost between Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un. I mean, they've now had 4 of these very jolly meetings, including a birthday party for Kim Jong-un in Beijing this year. But I think this is entirely practical, a pragmatic relationship. Yeah.
Well, I told my Chinese official counterparts at the time of the forum and of the APEC meeting that Kim Jong-un really seemed to have China over a barrel because he could levy these huge insults to Xi Jinping with impunity. They didn't like hearing that.
I bet.
Back to the floor. There's a person at the very back of the room, in the corner. You.
My name is Yuni Hoppe. I'm organizing a speaker event next week with North Korean defector Young-hwa Kim, who escaped out of North Korea and works and helps North Korean defectors. You met him actually in person at the rice bottle launch and wrote about
I think he
his
emailed
work.
me recently, yeah.
Exactly. He's coming to New York next week. You reported about it in April last year in the Washington Post. My question to you is, you met over 100 defectors, and have you seen over time a development of how they see Kim Jong-un and how they relate to the leader?
A development. I don't know. I mean, the thing that strikes me in talking to people who've escaped from North Korea is the reverence that many still have for Kim Il-sung, right? That they, even defectors, look back at that time, the formation of North Korea, as a time when North Korea was strong and prosperous and they were the good old days. It's really striking to talk to people and hear them talk in a nice way or about Kim Il-sung. But with Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un, it ranges from kind of nonchalance, not caring, not wanting to talk about it, to, visceral hatred. I think that these two unqualified people have managed to hold on for so long. But about Kim Jong-un, I think that they see him as somebody who is supremely unqualified. But so there's that part, but also I think it's just the longevity aspect of it. It didn't really matter who it was going to be. If the system would continue for a third generation, that was too much for many of the people I've talked to. They were shocked to discover that the regime was going to be handed down for a third or second transition. And also shocked when they saw Kim Jong-un for the first time, because the rollout, the messaging that happened about Kim Jong-un when he was announced to the population, they just heard about him. They didn't see him for a very long time. So when they did see him and see how young he was, in Confucian hierarchical Korea, they were astounded that this young guy was supposed to be their leader. So there is nobody is giving him any credit for being shrewd and tactical about this. Yeah.
Not to mention, as you put in the book, the young girl who said that when she saw his picture for the first time, she thought, he looks like a fat pig.
Yeah. I asked, so this was a really nice encounter. There was a mother that I had been seeing several times for the course of my reporting, and then one time I asked her if she would bring her children, and I also brought my son too, and Seoul, and we sat there on the floor of a Korean restaurant, and I asked the girl, about her first memory of seeing Kim Jong-Un. She was 4 years old. She was at kindergarten when the announcement happened, and she said, "Yeah, he was fat. I remember his face was fat like a pig," which I thought encapsulated such a good reaction. But also then after that was all her memory, and then. My son and her daughter sat there side by side playing iPhone games for the rest of the dinner. And it just, was this lovely little picture of an American child and a North Korean child, exactly the same people. So, I loved that interview with that girl for that reason.
Well, on the subject of defectors and of activism against the regime, can you make sense of the incident, the attack on the North Korean embassy and the group that's protecting Kim Jong-un's son? What's going on there?
Man, I can make no sense of that. I mean, even for the tales of North Korea, that was really astounding, right? Does everybody know about this raid on the North Korean embassy in Madrid? That group, I think, has become more and more controversial with actions like this. Obviously, Adrian Hong is now a wanted fugitive by the American authorities. But what I was worrying then about the safety of Kim Han-sol. So this is the Kim Jong-nam's son, who had been growing up in Macau, had been to school in Bosnia, and France, and was due to go to carry on at university, I think to Oxford. Or no, maybe not Oxford, maybe it was still in France. But, after he escaped with the help of this group called Cholima Civil Defense, they left a video and he's escaped to somewhere. And I guess every journalist at the time, including me, tried to find him. But I did so very half-heartedly. I kind of knew it was my journalistic duty to find him, to try to find him, but I kind of didn't want to find him because he is a normal, relative. He hasn't done anything to do. He didn't choose to be born into this family. So I thought he should be given an opportunity to lead a normal life, or as normal life as he can. So I guess I thought a lot about, I wonder if this incident and the attention paid to this group that had helped him escape might jeopardize his safety in some way and that of his family.
Could very well be. Yeah. Well, we'll never tell the Washington Post that you only pursued him half-heartedly. Your secret is safe with us.
Lucky this isn't live Broad Street, right?
We have a few more minutes, so the floor is still open. Yes.
Hi, I'm Andy Laub with Young Professionals in Foreign Policy. Anna, thank you so much for being here. Really great work. Sure. Recently, Kim Jong-un had some not-so-flattering words for former Vice President Biden, sort of appealing into President Trump as you were talking about checking all the boxes.
Yeah.
And also Mayor Buttigieg recently saying, "You won't see me," exchanging love letters with him. If there is a new president elected next year, and there's a more traditional diplomatic approach to North Korea, how do you think Kim Jong-un's posture might change?
I mean, how can I answer that? There are, how many Democratic candidates are there? 20-something? Yeah, I think, that goes beyond, that's too hypothetical even for me. I think that we can't tell. In some respects, I think Kim Jong-un was really lucky that he got Donald Trump and not Hillary Clinton, right? Hillary Clinton would have been much more hardline than that. So I don't think I can say anything about what might happen, with a different president, since we don't know who that is. But I can tell you that some North Korean diplomats actually went to see a fortune teller, a famous Korean fortune teller, to ask if Donald Trump would be re-elected next year. And the answer was yes. So I think that they are banking on him staying in power, yeah. But it's a concern for them too, is the answer, yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, yes, right here, please.
Ken Wasserman, I'm an attorney. Can you describe with any specificity the ideals of North Korea from the perspective of the North Korean leaders?
The ideals?
Yes.
Yeah, staying in power. I mean,
So there are no positive ideals.
not positive to us. I mean, I think they're positive to them, but I mean, they have often, I think one guiding principle, and which is relevant to them staying in power, is that they have viewed themselves as kind of morally superior. When they look at South Korea, they deride them as puppets of the American, puppets of America, that they're beholden to them. They think, Japan is this, evil, imperialist, hostile forces too. So they consider themselves to be ideologically pure, I guess, and uncorrupted by outside foreign forces. And so that's where the Juche self-reliance ideology comes in as well, I think. So I would think that's how they would answer. And also, for the longest time, the North Korean propaganda would emphasize, say that North Korea was richer than South Korea and that how lucky they were to live in this socialist paradise. And some years ago, that changed to say, we are morally superior to the South Koreans, devilish South Koreans with all of their vices. So I think that was a response to the influx of information of movies and things from South Korea. And I think a lot of that still holds today. They think of themselves as a cut above. Yeah.
If I could pick up on Ken's question, there is an intense nationalism to North Korea that is clearly a regime-strengthening factor, and that's built around the threat from external enemies. And this dates back, obviously, to Kim Il-sung and the story, the narrative of his guerrilla leadership against the Imperial Japanese Army. How can North Korea and North Koreans really adjust to the prospect of a radically different set of relationships under Kim Jong-un with the United States, no longer the American bastards, with the prospect of some rapprochement, reconciliation with Japan and so on? Will this society be able to make that shift? And is that, like the growth of markets and so on, potentially a destabilizing factor for the Kim dynasty?
I think that Kim Jong-un, if this happens, will portray it as a sign of his strength. It's because of his great leadership and because he made North Korea a strong and prosperous nuclear state that he, made the Americans give in to him or come begging for a more normal relationship there. So I don't think there is that much difficulty. The propaganda is in the realm of the ridiculous already. I think that they can use it to explain it away. It's because of our strength, not because of our weakness, that America has come to us with this. But, North Korea is a state founded in opposition to, they need an external threat to keep themselves, on constant alert and to justify the military expenses and things. So it's really striking now that, all of the rhetoric about Japan continues and, in fact, may be ramped up. Japan is enemy number one most of the time. And, look at the incredible turnaround of the past year where Shinzo Abe, who had, such a hawk on North Korea and who was completely in sync with Donald Trump, now has been deserted by Donald Trump. And Abe was hoping for the longest time that Donald Trump would see the light and come back to his realization. But in fact, it's Abe who's turned. It's now Abe who's not begging, that's too much, but is requesting a meeting with Kim Jong-un. And Kim Jong-un is not playing ball with that at all because he needs that external threat. He needs that enemy. Yeah.
We have time for one last question. No, Barbara? Yes, I see a hand back there.
Hi. Hi, Anna.
Hi,
Lucy Alexander. I'm a former Tokyo correspondent with Anna. Talking about Japan and talking about, you said before that China doesn't want North Korea to collapse. What do North Korea's neighbours want to happen? Presumably South Korea doesn't really want reunification.
Yeah, that's right, because South Korea doesn't want North Korea to collapse either. It's really, I mean, and the whole sunshine policy and policy of engagement with North Korea that it began and has continued in fits and starts since 1997, I think is all aimed at kind of making sure that North Korea doesn't collapse, helping their economy to grow and close the gap a bit, but staving off any kind of sudden event in North Korea. But this in South Korea, it's really a generational thing. So older Koreans who remember the war or their parents were lived through the war, and who remember North Korea Korea being one country, I think they still have this kind of longing for unification. And it's so arbitrary where you were, on which side of the line you were when the line was drawn in 1945, or in 1953, sorry, which side of the line you got caught on. So that generation continues to want unification, I think, but that generation is aging rapidly. They're not the majority of society anymore. So people in their 40s and 50s, and definitely the younger generation, they think, the people my age, 40s and 50s, would think, like, we worked so hard to create this great economy that we had. We do not want, why should we have to give that up for North Korea? And younger, their 20-somethings, view North Koreans as an entirely different nation. They think they're country bumpkins, people who don't know how to, order a latte for delivery on their cell phone and things. Like, they don't see any, they don't have that affection for them and things, and just see the economic cost of it. So I think it's very, very complicated from the South Korean perspective. And many North Korean defectors, they say they can't wait to find their families in South Korea and be taken in by them. And I always feel a bit sad when I hear that, because it's really, really hard for them in South Korea for these reasons, generally. China does not want any change. I mean, Japan is threatened by North Korea. I think they would definitely like North Korea to stop firing missiles at them, which they have for now, but beyond that, I don't know.
Well, I would add only that there is no country in East Asia that wants North Korea to continue to possess nuclear weapons and missiles. And that's a powerful and a unifying desire, including especially on the part of the Chinese, who know perfectly well, to your point about North Korean attitudes towards China, that this is not a benign force in North Korea. Yeah. But our time has come. I think that we've had a divinely perfect presentation from our brilliant comrade, Anna Fifield, and I ask you to join me in thanking her.
Thank you. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you, everyone.